Gosh, I hope this isn't like the primitive, dangerous microwave ovens of my century. Those things could really pop a hamster good. Uh-oh. That was fun, but only because this is the 22nd century. You see, kids who put hamsters in microwaves back where I'm from get taken away from their parents and put up for adoption. So don't do it.
We'll spread out commando style. Laverne, you go secure the area behind those double doors. Hoagie, you take care of upstairs reconnaissance. I'll maintain Command HQ here, in the lobby.
What are we looking for?
We've got to find where Dr. Fred is holding the tentacles.
This better not take too long. I've got an anatomy final tomorrow.
And I've got a show to set up later tonight. If I'm late, I don't get to test the drums.
If I know Dr. Fred, he's got the tentacles tied up in his secret lab. Question is, where's his secret lab? The Chicago Manual of Thermodynamic Flux Induction Circuit Design. Great stuff! That one looks like it's from a local hardware store. It's from George's Hardware. George says that every American should have a vacuum cleaner in their basement.
So before we begin, I just want to say that there were quite a few guesses sent in for The Secret of Monkey Island, which is undeniably one of the best titles to come out of LucasArts. But it wasn't the only good game they made. And for anyone who did guess that one, I'm willing to bet today's Ancient DOS game would have been your second or third choice. That game being Day of the Tentacle, which is a sequel to one of their very first adventure games, Maniac Mansion. Since there's very little to actually say about this game, this may be a shorter episode than usual, because if I go in too in-depth, I may end up spoiling it. But this is definitely one of the best examples of an inventory-based adventure game. The graphics are colorful, imaginative, and extremely well animated. The music completely fits the tone of everything going on. Plus, because it's using LucasArts' iMuse system, it's able to transition between two pieces of music almost seamlessly when appropriate. Not to mention, it has decent voice acting, a fair but still challenging level of difficulty, and a story that's completely off the walls, yet fits within the tone of the game. On top of all of this are some incredibly good game design decisions above and beyond the Call of Duty, which I'm going to point out later in the episode, plus the ability to switch between characters, just like in the original Maniac Mansion. In fact, let's get my only 3 complaints out of the way right now. The mouse cursor is kind of jittery. When you select actions you wish to perform at the bottom, they don't stay highlighted, since the highlight is used to point out default actions when you use the right mouse button. And you can't turn subtitles on when you have the voices enabled. Or if it's possible, there's no clear option for doing it. Because of that, you're going to see a lot of characters talking and not being able to hear what they're saying, so yeah, apologies ahead of time for that.
Finished. It's totally covered with crud.
Day of the Tentacle was developed and released by LucasArts Entertainment in 1993 as a one-player inventory-based adventure game. It supports VGA 320x200 256 color graphics, and while it supports the PC speaker, AdLib, Sound Blaster, MT32, and general MIDI devices for music, it only supports Sound Blaster cards for the sound effects and voiceover. While the music does sound better on the MT32 side of things, it's not nearly as huge a difference in quality as it was for last week's game, The Legend of Kyrandia. So if you don't have the stuff to do MT32 music, it'll still sound decent with the synthesized music. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, and almost 2 months ago, a fully remastered version was released online to digital services. Though as usual, I'm going to recommend getting it from the Good Old Games website at www.gog.com, where it can be obtained for $15. Now this is not the original game, as it features HD graphics, a different music system, and other enhancements, though it has options to play it as though it were the original version, and you can selectively turn certain enhancements on or off at will. Basically, it's about as good as a remastered game can be without radically changing anything, so I'd say it's worth picking up if you enjoyed the original game and want the improvements, or even if you're thinking about getting it just to play it. If, however, you want a physical copy of the original game like the one I'm playing, just for sake of collecting, be prepared to spend a lot. In brand new condition, a copy of this game on CD can go for over $100. Though I have noticed that despite the floppy disk version being more rare, it's actually worth less. Maybe because of its copy protection or something, which the CD version doesn't have. If you still want a physical copy but don't want to spend ridiculous amounts, you can usually find the CD alone for around $30 to $40, or you can go looking for a UK copy instead. For some curious reason, copies of the game made for the UK market are not only cheaper, but easier to find as well, with fully boxed copies going for more like $40 to $50. Plus there's a UK collector's CD which includes both Day of the Tentacle and Sam & Max Hit the Road, both in the same case, and that usually just goes for about $10 to $20. Lastly, there's an extra special limited edition version of this game out there released in a box shaped like a triangular bar standing upright. It's insanely rare, and I only know about it because one showed up in my eBay search, with an asking price of over $600. Keep in mind though, that the game disc included is exactly the same as the game discs or the regular versions out there. So you're essentially paying $600 for an oddly shaped box and for manuals and such shaped to fit into said box. Needless to say, it's only for the most hardcore of collectors.
They've got the spleen mixed up with the liver.
The story for this game starts out simpler than it did for the original Maniac Mansion, if you can believe that. But to bring you all up to speed, the first Maniac Mansion game dealt with a meteorite crashing near the mansion of an inventor and mad scientist known as Dr. Fred Edison. But the meteorite was actually a space alien, and it took control of Dr. Fred's mind, directing him to acquire human brains for nefarious purposes. Day of the Tentacle takes place 5 years after the events of the first game, where one of the pet tentacle monsters Dr. Fred created finds his way around to the back of the house and decides to take a drink of some toxic waste being dumped into a river. This causes a radical and insane transformation where, after a moment of extreme discomfort, the purple tentacle suddenly sprouts a pair of stubby hands. Oh, and becomes super intelligent and wants to engage in global domination. Dr. Fred, noticing what's happened, ties up both the green and purple tentacles, figuring they both might be affected, and plans to destroy them. The green tentacle, fearing for itself, manages to get a message sent via hamster to Bernard Bernoulli, one of the playable characters from the first game, who's a bit of a geek, but he rooms with two other friends of his, Laverne and Hoagie, and manages to get them to come along to help the green tentacle out. The gameplay begins when you get to the mansion and start trying to find the tentacles.
Have any people ever been hurt in this thing?
Of course not. This is the first time I've ever tried it on people.
As you'd expect from a typical inventory adventure game of this time period, you move around by clicking on the spot you want to move to, and can click on objects to perform actions on them. Left-clicking will have you move towards something, or attempt to enter something if it can be entered, or you can also use a left-click to select and then perform one of the 9 actions listed at the bottom. As mentioned earlier, don't get confused when you select an action and it doesn't stay highlighted, as the highlight indicates the default action which will be performed if you right-click on an object. However, this game has one major mechanic which comes into play very quickly: time travel. In the original Maniac Mansion, you controlled 3 different characters at once and could move them around and use them in tandem to solve puzzles. Now that still happens in this game, but instead of the 3 characters moving around in the same place and time, they only move around in the same place, as Hoagie ends up being sent 200 years into the past, while Laverne ends up being sent 200 years into the future. This leads into some extremely creative puzzles to solve, dealing with the time travel aspect, as changes in an earlier time period can affect a later time period. In fact, one of the easiest challenges to pull off early in the game has to do with this statue being carved in the past. If you switch out the artist's hammer, he'll lose his ability to do the statue and two brothers will switch places. But since they're differently handed, the statue in the present will change to be right-handed instead of left-handed. I say early in the game, but that's another design aspect of this game I feel was ingenious, which far too few adventure games actually do, and that's nonlinear puzzles. This game is filled with inventory puzzles to solve, but for the most part, many of them don't have to be done in any particular order. Thus, you can approach the puzzles however you see fit. Now, sooner or later, all puzzles have to be accomplished to win the game, as they all culminate together, but as far as I can tell, there's no real way to permanently screw any of it up. Well, I could be mistaken about that. Let's just say I've never run into that situation. I mostly just forget how to do certain things. You don't really need a walkthrough either. The game is extremely cleverly designed to drop subtle hints as you progress, though occasionally they can be a bit too subtle. For instance, when you turn on Green Tentacle's music in the present, it causes some fake barf stuck to the ceiling in the lobby below to peel down a bit. To get it to fall completely down, you have to push the speaker over to face the floor. Also, in all three time periods is a dead cousin Ted mummy, which you can have a one-sided conversation with, but doing so lets you get into the thinking of the characters you're playing as, and can give you ideas as to how you might progress. There's never any parts which tell you exactly what to do, but if you can get into the game's line of thinking, there's enough subtlety that you should be able to eventually figure things out. One aspect that's both ingenious and a bit insipid are the Chrono Jones. These time-traveling lavatories actually have a special function in that they can flush objects to each other. Essentially, any object flushed into the hole at the bottom will be available to retrieve from all three of the Chrono Jones, thus allowing you to teleport items across time. The only catch is that some objects won't fit, you can't use it on living things, and some objects may change when they come into contact with the chronofluidic substance, taking the place of what would normally be water inside of the hole. Using this feature to teleport items across time periods is necessary to complete the game, but the trouble is that you end up with 3 different inventories you have to manage, and unlike in the original Maniac Mansion where you could just bring one person up to another and have them trade items, here this can only be done at the Chrono Jones. So if you want to try a certain item in a certain time period, you first have to get all the way to the Chrono John with both of the characters you want to trade items between, then exchange items one at a time through the hole in both time periods. It's slow and tedious to do this, though admittedly isn't anywhere near as big of a deal once you know what you're supposed to do to win. Now, some of the hints can actually be with the items themselves as well. For instance, with the disappearing ink, if you attempt to use it in a way which isn't going to do anything, the character you're playing as will comment that it's not funny enough, suggesting that the way you're supposed to use this item is to pull a prank on someone. It's also possible in some circumstances to be allowed to use an item on something, but nothing significant actually happens. Many of the items in the game also need to be used more than once, which is another thing not common with early inventory adventure titles. Though I should point out, if you keep an item after using it, this is not necessarily an indication that you'll need to use that item again. Lastly, I have a really huge tip for those of you who want to give this game a go or haven't played it in a while and have forgotten how to do certain things, and that's to close the doors. Seriously, when you enter a room, try closing the door behind you and seeing if anything turns up. I forget how many times this trick is used throughout the game, but it's something to keep in mind. Also, don't forget that you can combine items together by clicking on one and then clicking on top of another. If they're in different parts of the inventory though, you can pick one up and then use the inventory scroll arrows without canceling your initial selection. Oh, and the game comes with the entire first Maniac Mansion game and can even be launched from within the game itself by using a computer in the game world. That's pretty freaking crazy and kind of unheard of for an early 90s game. As said, not a long episode because there wasn't really much to go into without spoiling a ton of the game. But in short, this game is just plain excellent. It does everything important right, has its own unique mechanics which are used to great effect, and if you do play through the thing, you're going to discover the end of the game. which gets pretty darn crazy. Even if adventure games aren't your thing, this is one you have to play at least once for the experience. It's wacky, challenging without ever being unfair, and a fun ride the whole way through. Now, all that said, this game's a bit temperamental to get working in DOSBox. The auto cycle setting is too slow, the max setting causes a small number of things to go too fast, and a fixed setting beyond 18,000 is liable to prevent the sound engine from initializing. So, set a fixed cycles count of 18,000, and that's probably the best you'll be able to accomplish. Instead, you may want to look into using ScumVM to emulate this instead, as that particular emulator has the emulation of this game nailed down. The only catch is that because of how ScumVM works, it can't launch the original Maniac Mansion when you get the chance. But from what I've read, since the full game is included in its own folder as its own separate executable, you should be able to feed that data into ScumVM and still be able to launch it as a separate program. Anywho, that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. After so many adventure games, I think it's time for some action. So for episode 189 of Ancient DOS Games, coming out Saturday, June 4th, we're going to be taking a look at a first-person shooter where you can actually buy stuff. I know, it sounds like most first-person shooters nowadays, but scroll back to the days of DOS, and most of them didn't have this feature. So if you think you know of such a game, then be sure to send your guess to adg@pixelships.com, and make sure to stay tuned as the episode's going to have some extra special things to see beyond the gameplay.
The LALR compiler is constructed by the following method. First, develop a rigorous elective grammar. If the elements have NP completeness, the